What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. So back in early 2021, I created my top 25 favorite films of all time. And then last year, 2023, I decided to do my top 26 to top 100 favorite films of all time, with the caveat of me saying to myself, look, I want to try to 2024, I want to try to create my 101 to top 250 favorite films of all time. And the reason being is that I knew that 2024 was a whole decade later from when I made my top 250 favorite films of all time back in 2014. Yes, back in 2014, I did that. And I remember still the stress of creating that list back in 2014. So I was like, create the year-long goal of creating this list in 2024. And so here I am delivering that list, guys. I recently released, I believe it was last month, my number 201 to 250 favorite films of all time. This time, you clicked on the video, so you know it. This is my top 151 to top 200 favorite films of all time. Now, it goes without saying, but I think I should say it regardless in case you are a new viewer. My list is not going to match yours, not in the slightest. Film is an art form, therefore it is subjective. So that being said, I am curious to see what your list will look like in the comment section, whether it's your favorite 250 favorite films of all time, or top 100, or top 25, or even top 5. I'm very curious to see what yours looks like in the comment section. So also keep in mind that this list, it does fluctuate. Like, film, again, is something that is subjective, and there are a lot of times where you'll watch a film and you might have a different viewpoint on it later on down the line. So that goes with saying with this ranking too, it can definitely change. Like, I could imagine even a year from now this might change, but I wanted to do this a decade later, so here we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my number 200, and then I'm going to wrap things up with number 151, and then be on the lookout for my number 150 to 101, which will be filmed pretty soon and then released a month later after this video. So guys, sit back and enjoy. So kicking things off with my number 200 is Do the Right Thing. Yes, this is an excellent film. Spike Lee did such a great job directing this. You can legit feel the heat rise, just like with the actual setting of this film. I think it does a really good job of tackling racism, and it's just one of those films that is a necessity for everybody to watch, especially if you were into film as an art form. So highly recommend Do the Right Thing. Next up, we have Best Picture winner, The Apartment. So this is my number 199, and The Apartment is very well done. It's a Billy Wilder directed film, and he's really good. Shirley MacLaine, Jack Lemmons have really good chemistry, and it's just a very, very good romantic comedy. If you've been sleeping on this film, I would highly recommend it. It is one of the best films of the 1960s, and there is a reason why it won Best Picture. It's very well made. So that's my number 199. Next up, my number 198. This is one that you definitely have to be in the right mindset to watch, as I found out on my second viewing. And my number 198 is Stalker. So yes, the first time I saw this film, I thought it was solid, but didn't really do much for me, but I decided to rewatch it. And on second viewing, I really dug it. But with the caveat, again, you have to be in the right mindset, because this film is very slow. It is kind of meandering in some instances, but it is still very well made. And the philosophical nature of the film is awesome. And the cinematography, there is a lot of creative choices that I personally really dug. And just a really, really good film. And, a favorite Andrei Tarkovsky film as the filming this video. Next up, my 197. This is a rare instance where the remake is actually better than the original. And that is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 1978. So keep in mind, I do like the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I want to, preface that. But I do think that this remake is better. And I really love the practical effects of this. And I think that the ending is just so good. And I also just love the methodical nature of this film. Like, it's a slow buildup. And as it's building up, you can really feel the tension. And it's a very palpable feeling. And Donald Sutherland is really good in this film. But again, if you are someone that loves body horror, loves practical effects, highly recommend this film. Also, it's PG, and I know it's a 1970s PG, but it's a very hard PG film. Like, holy cow. Very, very good film. So that's my number 197. Next up, my 196, we have The Father. This came out in 2020. It was a Best Picture nominee, and Anthony Hopkins actually won Best Actor. Well deserving. And I have to say, The Father, I know that it's only been out for a couple years, but I think that if you have anyone in your life that has dementia, or just in general is very forgetful, or even just if you have grandparents, I would highly recommend this film. Like, as someone that had a grandmother that unfortunately had dementia and recently passed away, this film really hit hard. It was one of those films that came out at the right place in my life, and I think the fact that the editing style really emulates what it must be like to have dementia, it's a really interesting perspective, and it really honestly helped me with my own grandmother. So I love this film. I think it's great. I think it should have won Best Picture in 2020. But at the same time, I understand that it's not for everyone because it is very, very sad. But I still think it's a necessity for everyone to watch, especially, like I said, if you have someone that you know that has dementia or even just, grandparents. So highly recommend The Father. Anthony Hopkins killed it with this film. So that was my number 196. Next up, my number 195, another film that is a tearjerker, and that is The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. Yeah, talk about growth. I remember the first time I saw this film was with my mom many, many years ago, and I thought the movie was just okay, but I remember seeing the Criterion Blu-ray at the record store, and I decided to pick it up because it was like $2, and on rewatch, I liked it better. But with each subsequent viewing, I liked it more and more. And the most recent viewing, I have to say, it really hit home emotionally. I just think that the concept is fascinating, and I think that Fincher's directing is top notch. And I think that, yes, it's long, and yes, that might be something that on first viewing you might not like. I do think that the length becomes less and less of an issue on multiple viewings, and I think that the filmmaking is just top notch. Of the nominees of 2008 at the Academy Awards, this was my favorite for sure, but it's a film that I feel like kind of gets overlooked now, unfortunately. But if you've been sleeping on this film, would highly recommend it. So that was my number 195. Next up, my 194. This is a film that's very important, especially in regards to French cinema, and that is La Haine, which came out in 1995. This is a really good slice-of-life film that at the same time does a really good job of critiquing police, and also shows that it's not something that's just in America, it's all over. This film I saw, I watched it in 2018, and then I rewatched it in, I think, late 2020 or early 2021. I forget. I do have it on Letterboxd though. But I remember it was just the perfect timing of when I rewatched it, and it just hit a lot harder. And I just think that the performances, the chemistry between the friends are really good. And again, those themes and the commentary is something that really hits hard, and it's aged very well. Love La Haine and highly recommend it. Next up, that was my 194. Next up, my 193. This is another film that I rewatched, and it just got better on, a second viewing, and that is Inland Empire. So Inland Empire, the first time I saw it, I thought it was solid back in 2015, but I decided to rewatch it, and I rewatched it, and I think it was might have been 1 a.m. when I started watching it, or something crazy like that. And I have to say, watching this film, especially late at night, is just an otherworldly experience, which, yes, is the case with a lot of Lynch films, but I think this one especially, because this is arguably possibly his most weird film, and I love it for that. And I think that it is so ambitious, and the fact that this is his last film that he ever made is just a real testament to his ability of being able to craft something that, yes, isn't for everyone, but at the same time is something that is so brave, so original, and just so thought-provoking. I have already been wanting to rewatch this film, and I saw it in November of last year, so I already want to rewatch it. So it tells you a lot. And the film, yes, is 3 hours long, but I gotta say, it is quite the film. Now, I will say as a caveat, just keep in mind that it is shot on camcorders, so if you're watching it on streaming, it's not going to look that good. But I will say the Blu-ray, it does look good, but this is never a film that's going to be what they call a looker. It's always going to be a film that, in terms of the way it's shot, it has limited technical aspects in that regards. But it's still something that I appreciate why he shot it the way that he did. And yeah, I love Inland Empire. Next up, we have a film that I saw at the right point in my life, and I rewatched it recently, and I absolutely loved it, and I actually cried, and that is Three Idiots. This came out in 2009, and if you've been sleeping on Three Idiots, I would highly recommend it. This is what introduced me to Indian cinema, and I think that it's the perfect introduction for other people as well, because it has some musical numbers for sure that are kind of random, but for the most part, it is grounded in realism, and I do think that the friendship is really something that's amazing, and I love the ambition of the story. This is such a good film. It's got a nice blend of comedy and drama, and I think that the melodrama, it feels so earned, and I think the twists and turns are also something that really kept me engaged, and I've rewatched it several times, and yeah, it never gets old. Love Three Idiots, and that is why it's my number 192. Next up, my number 191, we have Perfect Blue. So, Perfect Blue is a film that greatly inspired many films, including Black Swan, which I absolutely adore. And I have to say, I'm glad that I finally saw Perfect Blue last year and rewatched it this year, because it's a great film. It seems like it's one of those films that just gets better and better with each viewing, and I really do love the surreal nature of this film, as well as how the line between what's real and what's not is something that it's hard to differentiate, and that's, of course, by definition of what this film's trying to accomplish, because it's emulating the main character's mindset. So I really like that. This might be, at this point, my favorite anime. It's between this and Mind Game, but I would highly recommend you watch Perfect Blue. It's not for everyone because of how violent it is and everything, but it is a really good film, and one that, if you like surrealism, highly recommend this. And yeah, that is my number 191. Next up, my number 190, we have The Limey. So The Limey is a film that I didn't even know existed until I decided to watch all of Steven Soderbergh's films. And when I saw it on Prime, I immediately was captivated by the editing style, because you'll have a scene that's playing out, and then at the same time, you'll see what's happening in the future and what's happening in the past to those characters. So it's one of those things where it almost gives you a premonition, but at the same time, a little bit of backstory with what's going on, while at the same time being in the moment. It gives this experience that is hard to put into words, but I think the best way of putting it is that if you've seen Memento, this is in some ways the original Memento. It did come out a year before Memento, and I have to say, whilst I love Memento a lot more, I do think The Limey is really, really good. And if you are, really craving something that's similar to Memento, but at the same time standing on its own, I would highly recommend The Limey. It's an excellent film. That's my number 190. Next up, my 189. This is a film that's really grown on me over the years, and that is Full Metal Jacket. Just like most Kubrick films, you have to rewatch this film multiple times. And Full Metal Jacket, I remember I used to think that it's like the first half's really comedic and the second half is like really serious. But to be honest with you, the most recent viewing, I realized that that's not really the case. Yes, there is quite a bit of humor in the first half, but there is a consistent undertone of darkness in the first half that eventually really overtakes the film when a certain incident occurs about the halfway point. And it makes sense given the context of the film. And it's, again, one of those things that the more I've watched this film, the more I've appreciated it. And it's definitely one of the best war films ever made. And yeah, highly recommend this film. Next up, my number 188, we have Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. Yeah, I love The Irishman. What can I say? I will say that the Silence, The Aviator, and a couple other films, they barely missed my top 250. The Irishman has a special place in my heart, not only because, in my personal opinion, I do think that it's some of the best de-aging I've seen. It's also the fact that this seems like Goodfellas, but critiquing the genre and not really, embracing the genre. Which some people might say, hey, no, Goodfellas was a critique of the genre too. But The Irishman really hits home that, this lifestyle is something that makes you feel very lonely, and that at the end of the day, you aren't going to be happy with it. And that's something that I really, really appreciated. And at 3 hours and 29 minutes, he really goes into it. And I think that the ending shot is one of my favorite shots of the 2010s. I think that this film is excellently acted. It's very well put together. I will say that I've heard some people say they're not a big fan of the de-aging, and that's fine. That's your opinion. But for me, I just think that this is one of Scorsese's best. And I think that I think the fact that he directed this at, late 70s is just truly amazing, and just showcases that he's one of the best directors of all time. Love The Irishman. So that was my number 188. My next up is my number 187, which is Charlie Chaplin's The Gold Rush. So I own the Criterion Blu-ray, and it comes with two versions, the 1942 version and the 1925 version. Watch the 1925 version. That's the silent film version. The 1942 has a voiceover, and at the same time, they also cut out a lot of stuff. So don't watch that. Watch the 1925 original. And yeah, what can I say? This is a very funny film with some really good set pieces, and Charlie Chaplin just gives one of his best performances, and love the black and white cinematography. Just an overall very well-crafted comedy, one of the best of the genre, and yeah, that's why I have it as my number 187. Speaking of gold rushes, we have another film that's centered around the gold rush, and that is my number 186, The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. One of the most influential films of all time, especially coming from the 1940s. Humphrey Bogart did such a great job in this, as well as John Huston. And I just have to say this. The fact that this film, not John Huston, my apologies, Walter Huston. John Huston directed it. I knew, I was, as soon as I said, I was like, wait a minute. Walter Huston did such a great job with Humphrey Bogart, and John Huston's directing is top-notch. But I think what's also especially great is that this film came out when there was the Hays Code, meaning that there was like censorship in the USA. It's one of those things that the fact that this film was as dark and gritty as it was, despite being under the Hays Code, is really just amazing. The fact that Huston was able to get that out of the script, and it's a really good script. One of my favorites of the 1940s, and although I don't come back to it a lot, it is still a really good film that, again, is one of the most influential of the genre. Highly recommend this film. Next up, my number 185, we have Call Me By Your Name. Yeah, I really like this film. It's got one of my favorite ending scenes. Love the soundtrack. Love the locations. Like, this film, watching it, made me want to actually go to Italy. Love the performances. I know, of course, there's the controversy with Armie Hammer, but, you know, a film is made usually by several hundred, if not thousands of people, so I can still love this film regardless of, you know, one bad apple. But, yeah, this is just a very well-crafted film. It feels very naturalistic, and, again, you really care for these characters and you understand where they're coming from. And again, it's one of the best films of 2017, and I would highly, highly recommend you watch this film if you can sleep on it. So that's my number 185. Next up, we have my number 184, which is The Parallax View. So I saw this, you know, earlier this year. And when I saw it, I thought it was rock solid, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. So when there was the Criterion sale, I decided to actually pick this up. And when I rewatched it, it went from solid to holy cow, that was really good, like excellent. So I'm glad that I rewatched it. I'm glad that I own it on Blu-ray. It looks really, really good. And I just think that if you are someone that is fascinated by political conspiracy theories, this is a film that I highly recommend. It is one of the best. And again, Warren Beatty, so good, so good. Highly recommend this film. Next up, we have one of the most inspirational films of all time, and that is my number 183, Dead Poets Society, which came out in 1989 and actually got a Best Picture nomination. Robin Williams did such a great job with this film, and I also have to say that, similar to Call Me By Your Name, this has one of my favorite endings of all time. I think that the combination of emotional darkness that we see on screen with, you know, just genuine inspiration that we also see is a really interesting combination that works quite well. So I would highly recommend this film to everyone. So that was my number 183. Next up, my number 182, we have Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. This is a film that's very hard-hitting. It is morally complex, and it dives into morally great themes. It is not for everyone. It is a revenge film that is unlike anything you've seen, and the way it's executed is something that is quite unpredictable. I highly recommend you check this out. Park Chan-wook, what a director. One of my favorites from him, and yeah, that's why it's my number 182. Next up, my number 181, one of the most original films of all time, especially coming out from the 1980s, and we have Back to the Future. Yes, Back to the Future I'm a huge fan of. I think the second one is good, but the third one I'm not a big fan of. But the first one, it is just so well made. It's the perfect combination of, you know, popcorn entertainment, you know, with like spectacle such as visual effects, with just really interesting and original themes that are tackled, whilst at the same time characters that you just immediately get behind. And I also love the fact that the opening scene tells you everything that you need to know with what to expect for the rest of the film, but you don't realize it on first viewing. It's subsequent viewings when you do realize it. So I love Back to the Future. It is, again, a classic for a reason, and one of the best of the 1980s, and one of my favorite films of all time, and that is why it's my number 181. Next up, we have my number 180, which is Lost Highway, which is a David Lynch film, and I have to say, choosing between Lost Highway and Inland Empire is very difficult because they are very similar in regards to their approach, but their stories itself are quite different. But Lost Highway, I just love how it is basically an entry point in regards to what we would later on see with Mulholland Drive, which is my favorite David Lynch film. But Lost Highway at the same time, even though it feels like early blueprint of what we saw with Mulholland Drive, it still stands on its own, and I do think that it has one of the best soundtracks you'll hear of the 1990s, whilst at the same time garnering some genuinely unnerving, creepy imagery and some really good performances. And I just think that the film has such a dreamlike approach that works really well and just gets to me every single time. I love Lost Highway. If you love surrealism in films, I recommend this film. It's so, so good. That's why it's my number 180. Next up, my number 179, speaking of surrealism, we have Eyes Wide Shut, which came out in 1999 and was Stanley Kubrick's final film. Yeah, I don't own it on physical media because there is a Blu-ray out there, but I've heard that the Blu-ray is not the best, and I'm just waiting for a 4K. I've been telling myself for a long time now that we are going to be getting a 4K release, and I'm still convinced to this day that we will get a 4K release. So fingers crossed. Again, I'm filming this video on September 21st of 2024. So if this video comes out after the fact that it's announced, I'm hoping that happens, but just know that this is when I'm filming the video. So I love Eyes Wide Shut. I think that the second act, it's very interesting because a lot of times I'm always like, the second act of a film kind of, you know, loses my interest. But in regards to Eyes Wide Shut, it's a different animal altogether. The second act, I would argue, is the best act of the film, like especially the scene at the mansion. Holy cow, that scene's incredible. I love the eeriness to this film. Like it feels like it's real life, but at the same time, there's a dreamlike quality to it that is just something that can't really be described. It's one of those films that you have to experience. And I also think that its approach to relationships is very fascinating, and also just the gender dynamics. It was ahead of its time in many ways. Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, excellent performances. Just an overall very well-crafted film. One of my favorites in 1999. And yeah, that's why it's my number 179. Next up, my number 178, we have Life of Pi. Yes, one of my favorite films of 2012, and just a film that I can't wait to show my kids, because this is one of those instances of a film where it's PG, so you can show, kids and everything, but it's a film that I feel like is more geared towards adults in regards to the themes and everything. But it's still one of those films that can be, served as talking points for younger kids. And I think that that's something that's very interesting. And also, it does a really interesting job of bringing about a culture that for many Americans, they might not be aware about. So the way that it's approached is something I really dug. The visual effects are, of course, groundbreaking. I love the score. I love the acting, especially by the lead performance. And I just think that the symbolism, the very end of the film as well, just hitting all that home, is something that I really like. Love Life of Pi. It is a visual splendor that at the same time is very emotional and has its heart in the right place. And also, it gets better with each viewing. Like when I first saw this in theaters, I thought it was just like okay to solid. But now I'm, sitting here doing a video and having it be in my top 250 favorite films of all time. So talk about character development. Love Life of Pi. So that was my number 178. Next up, we have my number 177, which is The Usual Suspects. One of the best twist endings, but what's nice about this film is that even with the twist ending, like if you were to cut that out, even with that taken out, you still have a very, very interesting mystery film that at the same time has characters that you immediately are intrigued by. The combination of the crime genre and comedy is also something that I really liked, and I just think the acting across the board is great. Say what you will about Kevin Spacey as a person, but as an actor, just really nailed it. Love the narration too. I think that it being a noir as well is something that also worked, and just one of those fresh and invigorating films of the 1990s that I can't help but come back to every couple of years. Love The Usual Suspects, and that's why it's my number 177. Next up, we have another film of the 1990s that had one of the most famous twists of all time, and that is The Sixth Sense. Yeah, I have both of these films next to each other for a reason. It's very difficult for me to choose which one I like more. I think I like The Sixth Sense a little bit more. I don't know if that's just because I rewatched it recently, but there's a little bit more meat to the bones in regards to the characters, and I think that especially with the mother-son relationship that's at the heart of the film, I think is awesome. And I also think that this is more so than Usual Suspects. Like I just said, The Usual Suspects, you could cut out the last 10 minutes and it would still work and be really, really good. You could definitely do that with The Sixth Sense too, but it would hit even harder as well. Like the ending hits really hard and arguably even more so, but you still have a very hard-hitting ending. Like that scene towards the end with, the mom and the son in the car and everything, that scene just, it makes you want to cry. Like it is just such a great scene. So I love The Sixth Sense. I think it is still to this day M. Night Shyamalan's best film, and just one that, it put him on the map, and it's for a reason. It's a pretty darn great thriller horror film and drama. Highly recommend it. So that was my number 176. Next up, my number 175. I know that this film came out last year, but sue me. My number 175 is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. So I grew up watching Spider-Man. I grew up watching the the animated show from I think it was the 1960s. I watched the Spider-Man films with Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, Tom Holland, blah blah blah. All those things, they never really made me say oh, I love Spider-Man. But I have to say, watching Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, it made me understand why people love this, because this is a film that, yes, it's PG, and yes, it's geared towards first and foremost younger audiences. It has a lot of depth to it, and it dives into a lot of complex themes that I really loved. It made me feel conflicted, and I love the fact that it did that. And also, it gets better with each viewing, and the filmmaking is just outstanding. Even if the sequel isn't as good, the fact that this film exists and the fact that this film works on its own is something that I love, and that's why I'm happy I own it on 4K. Highly recommend this film. Next up, that was my number 175. Next up, my number 174, we have Modern Times. Yes, that's right. I'm a big Charlie Chaplin fan. What can I say? I love Modern Times. This was actually what introduced me to him, and it's still to this day my favorite from him. I think that it's great. I think that it also works really well in regards to serving as like an analogy for, of course, the Great Depression. And I just think Charlie Chaplin's factory scene in particular, like that set piece, is phenomenal. It's easily one of the funniest scenes I've seen personally in regards to a film, and it just works so well. It's also only 87 minutes long, and it's a really good film. So if you are someone that is like, kind of, standoffish in regards to older films, this is one of the best of the 1930s. I would highly recommend you check it out. And that's why it's my number 174. Next up, my number 173. I watched this because I heard it was a really good Western in regards to my preparation for my top 10 Western films of all time. So I watched it, and I really liked it. And then I rewatched it once I picked it up on 4K, and I ended up loving it even more. And that is McCabe and Mrs. Miller. This is a film that it's unlike any Western that you will ever see. That third act in particular, with what it does and how it really subverts your expectations of what to expect with, a typical Western, is just phenomenal. I also love the fact that this film, like, they actually had it where when it was snow coming down, like, that actually was coming down, and it really made it all the more cinematic. Highly recommend you watch this film, and I'm always talking about method viewing on my live streams. This is a film that, in regards to method viewing, I would highly recommend you watch it on like a snowy day. Trust me, it'd be so fitting to watch. And Warren Beatty, Julie Christie, they're really good in this film. One of my favorite Westerns of all time. And as you see by this video, one of my favorite films of all time already. I'm looking forward to rewatching it many more times on Criterion 4K. So that was my number 173. Next up, my number 172, we have Judgment at Nuremberg. One of the most objective films that you will ever see. I promise you that. This is a film that, yes, it is 3 hours and 6 minutes long, but don't let that, make you say, oh, I don't want to watch it. This is a film that flies by. Like, it is a film that is consistently engaging, because what you're seeing on screen, without spoiling the premise or just anything about this film, you are constantly being questioned in regards to what your morals are while watching the film, because these are characters that feel like living and breathing characters, and you understand their perspective and you care about them. And that's really amazing that they're able to do that on both sides of the aisle, and you as audience members are almost serving as like the judge. And I think that it's really, really good. Stanley Kramer directed this film, and he had just such a wide range of being able to direct something like It's a Mad World, Inherent the Wind, and then something like this. He is a great director. I highly recommend this film. Next up, we have another court film. I was having a difficult time choosing which was which one I preferred more, and I have to say, I think I slightly like this one more, which is why I have this next one at my number 171 and not 172. My number 171, we have Witness for the Prosecution. This film is twisty. It's got a lot of interesting story beats that you don't see coming. The makeup work is fantastic. The acting is great. And just the writing overall is very strong. And again, similar to Judgment Nuremberg, it makes audience members get tested. And I love the fact that a director is willing to test audiences, because it really showcases not only a trust with the audiences, but also just a real trust in the script. And yes, it's a great script. Billy Wilder directed this, I believe. Yes, he directed it. And his directing here is just top notch. Really, really strong film. If you like courtroom films, watch Judgment Nuremberg, watch Witness for the Prosecution. They are both 100% worth your time. And that's why I have Witness for Prosecution at my number 171. Next up, my number 170, we have A Cure for Wellness. So I know you probably heard mixed things about this, such as that it didn't do well with critics and that it also didn't do well at the box office. But I would like to argue that 10, 15 years from now, this will be looked at as a modern day classic. Yes, it is so good. I love the directing. I love the lead performance. Yes, the lead character isn't exactly likable, but this is definitely one of those arcs of a character that you're not really supposed to like him per se, but the journey that he goes on, you can't help but at the same time be fascinated by all the things that he experiences. This is like a mix of The Shining with Shutter Island. I would highly recommend you watch this film. It is so good. Not for everyone though, because it does veer quite a bit into like a lot of weird territory, but I dug this film quite a bit. That's why I made my list. Next up, my number 169, we have Midnight Cowboy. This won Best Picture back in 1969, and deservingly so. This is one of those instances where you could see that this film was going to almost jumpstart what we saw in the 1970s, where, you know, there was a lot of adult fare, grittiness to the films that we saw in the landscape of America, and for the better. I mean, Midnight Cowboy is great. It's alongside like films such as like Easy Rider, Five Easy Pieces, where it's like, you know, really capturing a slice of life in a very interesting way. And this film might not necessarily be for everyone, but if you like dramas, I would highly recommend it. Voight and Hoffman together are incredible. So yeah, that's my number 169. Next up, my number 168, we have District 9. This is a sci-fi film that really does such a good job of getting you into the mindset of this lead character, but also having empathy for people that don't necessarily look like you. And I think that that's something that is really important, but also the mockumentary-esque approach to it, or I shouldn't say mockumentary, documentary approach to it, is something that I also really liked, and it felt very fresh. Also, the visual effects and makeup, incredible. Really good. It got a Best Picture nomination despite being genre fair, and it deserved it, honestly. It's one of my favorite films of the 2000s, and I would highly recommend you watch it. Like, please, watch District 9, especially if you like sci-fi. That's my number 168. Next up, we have my number 167, which is Sweet Smell of Success. The first time I saw this film, I thought it was solid, but when I rewatched it, I absolutely loved it. This is everything that I love about the late 1950s, how they were, almost at the 1960s, where you could pretty much do whatever, because, the 1960s is when the Hays Code was lifted. But this is one of those films that's definitely pushing the Hays Code, and it's a really good film. If you like strong writing and strong characters with some seediness, in between, this is the film for you. It's really good, and that's why it's on my list. So that was my number 167. Next up, my number 166, we have For a Few Dollars More. Not my favorite in the Dollars trilogy, but I absolutely love it. It is one of the most influential films for sure, and just one of my favorite Westerns in general, and that's why it's on this list. Next up, we have my number 165, which I just was going to get it, but I just realized that I don't own it, and that is my number 165, which is Network. This came out in 1976. It got a slew of Oscar wins, and of course got nominated for Best Picture. I don't own the Blu-ray because part of me thinks that it will get a 4K release down the line. Fingers crossed, but I love this film. I think it's a really good companion piece with like All the President's Men, which ironically came out the same year. But yeah, if you like satires, this is one of the best, and that's why it's on this list. Next up, my number 164, we have Fantastic Planet. This film has some of the best world building you will have ever seen, and I also can say this for sure. Even though it's an animated film, this is by no means a film that's geared towards children. This is a film that is geared towards adults. There is so many depravity that you will see watching this film. Like, it is a film that's very hard to watch at times, despite it being animated. It's got a very kooky score that I absolutely love, and it's just very well animated. And it's only 72 minutes, but it's able to really stuff a lot of world building that, to this day, I'm still thinking about. And that's why I'm glad I own it on Blu-ray. It's one of my favorite animated films. Next up, we have Asteroid City. So this is a film, the first time I saw it in theaters, I thought it was good, but just couldn't get it out of my head, and I kept rewatching it, and now it's to the point where I'm like, yeah, I absolutely love Asteroid City. In fact, I'll take it one step further. It is one of my favorite Wes Anderson films, and as you see on this list, it is also one of my favorite films of all time. I just love this film. I think that it really garners an emotional response from me. I know some people say that, it's one of Wes Anderson's least in terms of quality. I would disagree with that, though, but again, film is subjective, but I just really like this film. It's a very multi-layered film, whilst at the same time giving a complexity with these characters that I just really appreciate. It's basically Wes Anderson's Synecdoche, New York. So if you've seen Synecdoche, New York, you kind of have an idea on what to expect structurally from this film. So I love Asteroid City. That's why it's on this list. Next up, my number 162. This is another one of those films that I saw in theaters at a very late showing, and I wasn't a big fan of it the first time. I thought it was just okay, but I just couldn't get the ending out of my head, so I kept rewatching it, and it just keeps getting better. And that is my number 162, Nightmare Alley, the remake. Yeah, Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley is it's phenomenal. I've seen some people say that they're not the biggest fans of it, that they like the original. Whilst I have seen the original, I thought the original was okay. I can see why Del Toro expanded on it, and I do think that his vision is just a lot more in tune with what I personally like about the story itself. And I think that the character arc of Bradley Cooper's character is it's so fascinating. It's something that I just can't get out of my head. It's very thought-provoking, in my opinion. And I also just think that it does a really good job of blending genres. It's a film that's hard to describe, though, and that's why I can see why it didn't do well at the box office. But I am glad it got some Oscar, love in regards to nominations, because maybe down the line people will come across this film, and maybe down the line it will also become a cult classic. So, but for me, I love Nightmare Alley, and that's why I have it on this list. Next up, my number 161, we have The Conversation, which came out in 1974, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, and I thought this film was good when I saw it back in, I think it was 2013 when I first saw it. But I thought it was good, but didn't really remember much about it. But I decided to rewatch it recently because I'm trying to watch all Francis Ford Coppola's films. So I decided to, watch this film and rewatch it, I should say. So I rewatched it and I loved it. And then I rewatched it again, double billed with another film that I'm actually just about to talk about. But I watched it double billed and I was just like, okay, this confirms it. I love this film. On third viewing, I was like, yep, this is going to make this list. It's a very moody, paranoid thriller that, yes, is a slow burn, but what it leads up to is something that's really fascinating. And I think it's got an incredible ending. Gene Hackman, what a performance. Definitely a film that if you like paranoid thrillers, please watch this film. It is so, so good. And that's why I have it as my number 161. Next up, my number 160, this is the film that was paired with The Conversation for my friend Austin Rawcliffe's movie night, which shout out to Austin. And that film is Blowout. So Blowout is great. I actually blind bought this several years back. It was a film that I've heard about for a long, long time because, fun fact, my mom actually went to the school where there was a lot of people that were offered to be, extras in this film. My mom declined, unfortunately, but it's just one of those fun facts where it's like, hey, this film took place in the area that, my mom lived in. So it's like, it's a pretty cool thing where it's like, okay, I need to watch this film. When I finally watched it, I was like, wow, this is great with like a killer ending, literally. And the second viewing, the third viewing, it gets better and better. Like, it's a film that grows with time. And I absolutely love De Palma's directing here. And again, similar with The Conversation, it's a very good paranoid thriller. And the pairing of these two is immaculate. Please, if you like The Conversation, watch Blowout. It just doesn't seem to get enough talk in regards to discussion of this kind of genre, but it's phenomenal. Please watch this film. Next up, my number 159, we have The Shape of Water. Yes, I know I have it pretty close to Nightmare Alley, and that's because, truthfully, I'm going back and forth on which I prefer in regards to, my ranking. Like, right now I have The Shape of Water a little bit higher, but I love Shape of Water and I love Nightmare Alley. And what I love especially about both, specifically this, is that it does such a good job of blending genres, while it's at the same time really getting behind the lead character and her journey. Alexander Desplat's score is great. I think the ending is a nice book ending, and it's a film that, on paper, you wouldn't think it would work, but in execution, it 100% does. Very, very good film, and I'm glad it won Best Picture. Great film. Next up, we have my number 158, which is Sicario. I do own Sicario on 4K. I sold the Blu-ray, but the 4K didn't come with the slipcover, so here we are. But anyway, Sicario, great film. I think that it does a really good job of depicting the border in regards to the United States. And I think that it's one of those films that when it came out, I remember I was like, holy cow, like, so this is just something that's like unwinnable. And it's like that nihilism of this film, I really appreciate. Like, every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, it just does such a good job of just like depicting how like things aren't black and white. There's a lot of gray in the world. And this film is very nuanced. Even just the build up to certain thrilling and action-packed scenes are something that you can feel the tension. It's very palpable. Score is great. Cinematography is amazing. Denis Villeneuve really did a good job with this film. I love it. That's why it's on this list. Next up, we have 157, which is Poor Things. So I do not own this on Blu-ray. I believe that it will be getting a 4K release pretty soon. So when that happens, I will own it. But yeah, I loved Poor Things. I think that it was fantastic. An incredible combination of fantasy, comedy, drama, and many other genres. Emma Stone did an incredible job. Everybody involved with that film should be commended. Like, they did a great job. It is a modern-day masterpiece, and I can't say enough positive things. Somehow, some way, Yorgos Lanthimos made his masterpiece. And I'm saying that as someone that thought The Favorite was a 5 out of 5. Like, Poor Things, I somehow think is a little bit better. That's why it's on this list. Next up, my number 156, we have Long Live the Flesh. Just kidding. But no, seriously. Videodrome. Yes, Videodrome is incredible. One of my favorite David Cronenberg films. I think that it is one of the best body horror films. Love the makeup. Love the score by Howard Shore. Just one of those films that I keep coming back to. And I think that with the world building that it does, it's really good. And it's only 89 minutes, but it's so well paced. Very, very good film. Love how moody and, the tone really matches that. It's such a good film. Highly recommend it, especially if you like body horror. Next up, my number 155, we have The Place Beyond the Pines. If you are someone that comes from a, a thorny family or a broken family or just a family that has issues, which, to be fair, I guess every family does, this is the film to watch. This does such a good job of breaking down family dynamics in a very interesting way, whilst at the same time also blending into different genres as the film progresses. There's a twist, I would say, at the end of the first act that just really shook me the first time I saw it. And to this day, every time I watch it, it just does the same effect. But I think that the third act, I remember in the past I wasn't a big fan of it, but with each viewing I find myself loving it more and more, to the point now where I'm pretty close to saying that this is a masterpiece. But I love this film. I think it's so, so good. And yeah, please watch this film. Next up, this is a film that, honestly, I should do a movie night with The Place Beyond the Pines in this next film. This next film is my number 154, Waves. Yes, Waves made this list. It's funny because this is the great thing about film, how over time things can change. Waves was a film that I thought was good when it came out back in 2019, but it didn't even make my honorable mentions list. But I've come back to it a couple other times, and each viewing I just have loved it more and more. And similar to The Place Beyond the Pines, there's something that happens almost in the middle of the film. And the first time I saw it, I wasn't a big fan of the second act. The second half, I should say. But in subsequent viewings, I've actually loved the second half. In fact, I thought that it worked really well. And I just think that by the third time, I actually was crying the third time that I watched this film. I just think it does such a good job of really, similar to Place Beyond the Pines, breaking down into family dynamics and how certain things are, issues, but at the same time how it might not be an issue at first, but then down the line you realize that it is. Waves will break you if you are someone that can relate to that. I think this is a phenomenal film that only seems to get better with time. Love Waves. Next up, my number 153. This was one that I watched in preparation for ranking all the 1980s Academy Award Best Picture nominees, and that is Mississippi Burning. Gene Hackman, William Dafoe. This is a film I've been putting off for a long time, and when I finally saw it, I was like, why did I put this off for so long? I've seen it twice now. I saw it a second time on Kino Lorber Blu-ray, and it is an incredible film. Truly a great film. Second viewing, I somehow loved it even more. If you like history, if you like films that are diving into social commentary, which many films do, but this film in particular just does such a good job of really diving into racism. And I also think that as a detective story, it also works quite well. And the dynamic of South versus North is something that this film just really tackles in a very nuanced way that I really appreciated. Love Mississippi Burning. Please watch it. And that's why it's my number 153. Next up, my number 152. This is Arrival. Yes, another Denis Villeneuve film. Denis Villeneuve did such a great job directing this. Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner. Great twist ending. Just an overall film that the structure is everything, but at the same time, I love how this is a film that's about aliens coming down, but at the same time, it's not nonstop explosions. It is all about the drama, the characters, and those are put at the forefront, and it works really well. This film almost brings me to tears. It is quite an emotional film, and I just think it's so, so good. And it's a very smart film, too. 2016, when I saw it first, I noticed that right away. I was like, this is a very smart film. And to this day, when I rewatch it, I'm like, yep, this is a very smart film. This is the gold standards on what sci-fi filmmaking is all about. And next up for this video, the last entry, we have another film that's similar to Nightmare Alley. My number 151 is a film that the first time I saw it, I thought it was okay, but I couldn't get it out of my mind, so I decided to rewatch it, and I got better, and then I kept coming back to it, and it got better and better, and now here we are. It's on this list. And my number 151 is The Power of the Dog. Love this film. Like I said, first time I saw it, thought it was just okay, but it got better and better with each viewing. And now I'm at the point now where I'm picking up new information each viewing, and I'm just growing to love it more and more. I think it's fantastic. I would highly recommend you pick up the 4K because it looks really good on Criterion. So highly recommend The Power of the Dog. It is a very smart Western film that only gets better with each viewing. And yeah, that's why I have The Power of the Dog. It's my number 151. But yeah, guys, that's my number 151 to 200 in regards to favorite films of all time. Let me know your favorite films of all time in the comment section down below. And stay tuned for my last one, which will be top 101 to 150. Stay tuned for that for next month, guys. And as always, goes without saying, I really appreciate you guys watching. Don't forget the subscription, notification bell, follow me on Letterboxd, and I will catch you guys later.